All right, so thanks again, everyone, for joining us. We're really excited today about the opportunity to talk with everyone and some discussions that we're going to be able to have across municipalities and across disciplines. We're going to have some local municipal teams speak about some of their experience with emergency preparedness, and then we'll also have a presentation from Ingrid, who kind of provides a perspective from outside of the state of Massachusetts to give a little bit of a different insight. And then at the end, there will be some time for discussions, question and answers, and we'll go into next steps. Dan, if you could go to the next slide, please. So again, this is being recorded. If you could go ahead and rename yourself in the Zoom if you're signed in through a phone number or through something for an iPad, for example. Although right now it looks like everyone is signed in with a name and not a number. If you need any assistance throughout the presentation, please feel free to send a chat message to either Dan or myself, and we'll help you get whatever the issue is resolved. Dan, okay, great. And before I introduce the speakers, I just wanted to kind of get everyone's thoughts going in the chat. If people wouldn't mind, go ahead and place in the chat kind of what their main priority is with emergency preparedness, what keeps them up at night, so to speak, related to emergency preparedness. Today, we're going to, as people are putting those in the chat, I'll go ahead and kind of give an outline of what we're going to hear about today. We really wanted to hear how in municipalities do emergency management departments work together collaboratively and form teams within their municipalities to respond to emergencies, and really kind of what benefits do municipalities see when they're able to have those teams work during emergencies and during non-emergencies as well, and demonstrate the importance of the collaboration at all levels. So that being leadership level down, and then also kind of back up how the support and the trust that's built through relationships can inherently enhance communities' capabilities to respond during events. So I'm seeing a lot of different things in the chat. So MOUs, updating set plans. Yes, those are long plans and time consuming to update. A lot of shelter plans. Yeah, so definitely, I know emergency management obviously encompasses a large variety of areas. So, we're really trying to look to see how we can enhance those capabilities in our municipalities. So today we are very gracious to have two groups of municipal teams. So we have from Lynnfield, we have Rob Dolan, town administrator, and then we also have Glenn Davis, who is the fire chief and the emergency management director, who will be speaking in a little bit kind of about how Lynnfield's approach to emergency management within the town. And then we also have Captain Glenn Cronin from Malden, who is the emergency management director, along with Chris Webb, who is the public health director and the deputy emergency management director over in Malden. And then once we hear from kind of our local teams, we'll hear from Ingrid, who is the former director of emergency response group development out of New York, to give some perspective from her experience. So if you could go to the next slide, Dan. So again, when we have the two municipal teams speak, they're going to touch upon kind of the reorganization, collaboration, and trust that they've kind of built and fostered over the years, and how they've seen it played out recently with the response to COVID that we've seen over the past 2 years, and really the importance of all three of those, and how that was able to help them be successful as a municipality and support their residents. Dan, if you could go ahead and pull down the slides. And then once you do, I'll turn it over to Rob and Glenn from Lynnfield.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Rob Dolan. I'm the town administrator of Lynnfield. Before that, for 17 years, I was the mayor of Melrose, Massachusetts. So I've gone from a medium-sized city of 30,000 plus people to a smaller community of 12,000. So my experience over the years has been pretty varied with emergency management. Most pressing issue I faced was the Mother's Day floods back in the early 2000s, in which we lost in Melrose over 1,500 homes, 8,000 total structures, but 8,000 homes were flooded. Melrose is basically a swamp. We also have had the evacuations of several elderly complexes, 300 plus residents. We had school incidents. We had significant fires. Some of you remember the MWRA, when their water was contaminated for 4 days, and you truly realized in many ways how weak we are in terms of not having water for 4 days and what had to be done. As well as we had early 2000s a neo-Nazi rally in Melrose and Wakefield that brought several groups and several dangerous situations. So it's not just, we've also had N1, obviously the swine flu, H1N1, and all those different issues. So I've seen from the executive level a lot of different issues, and I'll speak from that executive level. I think the first post-COVID question I have is, what is the emergency management position, right? Very few of us can afford a full-time emergency management position. So what happens? Most of the time, what happens is someone is given a stipend, usually the fire chief or a lieutenant or a captain or someone in the police department, or to do a job that, you know, for 5 to 10 grand a year is absolutely overwhelming and not practical. The other people that we do find are retired, oftentimes public safety people who enjoy the field, probably give you a lot more hours, but at the same time, one person is not really capable of doing all of these things. So I guess another question to present is, who can be an emergency management director? I think as an executive, we immediately go to police and fire, but I would argue that there are several different departments or people with different backgrounds that could be an emergency management director, i.e. A board of health director. I think that person, or really an administrative person that runs a team approach, can also do it. So that's what we did in Lynnfield. We have so few people here, we created a team, and that team really forces us to leave our egos at the door. And I've seen some pretty tough situations with egos. I've seen a pushing match between a police chief, a fire chief, and a superintendent of schools to determine in a very serious situation who had control of the site. And that was actually shocking to me. And I know we all run different fiefdoms and come from different places, but I think what we did in Lynnfield is to strip down those egos to solve the problem. So we had a team which consisted of the board of health director, the fire chief, the police chief, the superintendent of schools, the town planner, the head of school nursing, the DPW director, and the individual who runs our water system. We did it as almost a city council or a board of selectmen. The fire chief, Glenn Davis, led these meetings. We had votes on all issues, all in regarding responsibility, all in when it came to being yelled at for ordering masks, all of those things. So none of us were alone in this. And I think that kind of arm to arm life preserver in the water together, in the cold water, allowed us to, as a very small community, manage. And it destroyed those walls that we often find between departments because where we come from. Another thing we were able to destroy is, I think, the most difficult thing is the idea of the school department being a separate country and them being almost a principality in the community, meaning they're a forbidden city. Oftentimes the relationships are not there. The idea that the principal is the head of the school and how that oftentimes conflicts in an emergency situation with the needs of a police chief and a fire chief. So by bringing in the school department and have the school department truly be a partner in this and truly understanding that they're part of a team and not a separate entity really was the great success of our COVID experience and emergency management experience here. Because at the end of the day, the superintendent doesn't want to be left alone either. We have supported each other. So when we had to talk about, school, ending school or closing school or masks, she enjoyed that support of a greater team in front of the school committee and hostile audiences that we probably all experienced. I would say, though, that my experience with emergency management has been broad, large planning endeavors. What happens when there's a chlorine boom in town? What happens if there's a school shooting? And those are all important. And I know all of us have plans that sit in bookcases, but it really is in a practical emergency, the small stuff, the unique stuff about where you live that makes the difference. When we had to evacuate a 300+ elderly building, when there was no heat, or there was flooding, what do you do with the pets? How do you manage medications? How do we create a situation with people with mental health? All of those issues end up becoming at the forefront and not necessarily the massive planning. Communication is also particularly important. We all think code red or some sort of email system is the way to deal with the public. But the fact is, in today's society, I'll give you an example. Many of you probably have experienced it. We had a situation where a student potentially had a gun in school, and they knew about it. In fact, the child told us that it was going to happen that morning. And as the incident is happening, every kid has their cell phone out and is live streaming the event. So what happened after that? We had 150 cars surround Melrose High School with parents because the real-time information is critical. We don't have 15 minutes when there's Twitter, when there's Facebook, when there's Snapchat and all of these things. So when we thought everyone knew how to send out an emergency message, really only 2 or 3 people did. And that 15 to 20 minutes to learn how to send out a connect ed or a code red, because only 4 people in the kingdom knew how to do it, really caused us a lot of problems. And although we got the message out in about 40 minutes, it was about 38 minutes too late, according to the public. So those type of trainings, those small individualistic, as if you live in an ocean, it's very different than if you live somewhere in Western Massachusetts, or if you have a massive mall in the middle of your town, very similar to Lynnfield, than if you're in a more rural area or a summer hotspot. All those are particularly important because at the end of the day, we can always have trainings like we did in terms of preparing for a flu or some sort of mass immunization. Well, when it happened, were those plans practical? Did we have all the small stuff in place to be able to deliver? For us, we really didn't. We had all sorts of books and plans, but at the end of the day, the practicality of the situation called on us and our team to think differently in order to deliver what we had to deliver. So in terms of small towns, I think the only way to do this is through a smaller regional approach by smaller communities together, to either hire somebody or to work together as a team to talk about regional spacing in terms of where we can have people in terms of evacuations, hunger centers if there's no food available, water centers. I mean, these man-made borders between Melrose and Wakefield or Lynnfield and North Reading are really man-made borders, and they need to be shut down and opened up, I should say, and used as a mechanism for us to deliver services, which I think really, I know we have districts for health, but really I think COVID changed a lot of things in our lives. And I think, obviously emergency management is one of them. Also, I think, maybe the reevaluation of CERT teams, which was a system that was put in place that a lot of communities did do, with citizens helping. As we know, there were citizens that helped us in our immunization of children, to entertain them, to make sure there were cartoons playing as they waited an hour for a shot, et cetera, et cetera. And the clergy in our houses of worship, in our VFWs, in our veterans organizations, housing, in our Knights of Columbuses and our Elks, to use that space to our advantage as a community. So those are my experiences. I do think that the current system that we have of the stipendiary position is way too overwhelming. I don't think the state should be taking over these things, because I think, as I talked about, the individuality of each of the places where we live, sweating the small stuff is the difference between success and failure, based upon where we live, our community culture, and what the expectations of our citizens are. So I think in Lynnfield, if I would say one thing, we strip down the egos. We strip down who is in charge and let it go, and have smart people with different experiences in the room making decisions that in many cases there was no truly right answer. There was simply the best answer that we had with the information that was given. So Glenn, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to echo what Rob said there. I think so. I was a fairly new fire chief at the time. I only have 3 years on the job now. So when COVID started, I had just begun. We knew that emergency management in Lynnfield was lacking, if you will, from prior leaders and whatnot. And we had engaged with the community compact with the state of Mass, and we had engaged, several months before COVID hit, and we had formed a team, and we had started having meetings. We started working on our SEM plan. I know somebody mentioned that in the chat area. So we had looked at the COOP plans and all of that. I think the advantage of fire chief being emergency management director is the incident command system. ICS works. Fire departments tend to live in it more than police do, or more than health directors or administrative folks. So when we first started this and we built out an incident command plan and an operational plan for this, to speak to Rob's point, there were no egos, so there's no titles. If Rob had a position in the team, which he did, that was his position, and it didn't matter that he was town administrator. It didn't matter that I was fire chief. The role that you played on the team was the role that you played. And the beauty of the incident command system is it's scalable. We had to scale pretty large for COVID. We met every single day for months on end, as did everybody else on this call, I'm sure. And with it being scalable that way, we're able to do that. We're able to handle it with no egos. We would sit in a room, we would take the data that was available to us, provided by the state or the CDC or whoever, would filter through it and would apply it to Lynnfield, which is different than Lawrence or Lynn or other big cities, but that's what makes it scalable and makes it work. There were no egos in the room. The collaboration among department heads, and I think most importantly, the collaboration between our select board. We didn't have to invoke select board meetings frequently to vote on things. They gave the power to town administrator Rob, and he was able to speak on their behalf because of the trust we had built in a team. We proved ourselves to them that we weren't going to go rogue. We weren't going to change all of the policies in the town of Lynnfield, but we were going to act accordingly and appropriately. So we were able to enact things quickly because of the trust we built across the team and the collaboration we had. That's kind of my experience through this. I think the ICS really worked well. I think others can jump in and speak to that. I know we're going to hear a little bit more about that on a larger scale in a bigger city in a few minutes. But that's my take on it as a new fire chief. You're right. I get a stipend for what I do. I became much more an emergency management director during COVID than a fire chief. Fortunately, I had a deputy chief that could run day in, day out operation of the fire department, so I could focus on the incident at hand. We just met this Monday, and we're scaling back more. We're going back to our monthly emergency management meetings to talk about things other than COVID now. Other events, storms, we're coming into hurricane season. We are working on our SEMP plan. We'll make sure our COOP plans are all set with all the department heads and able to do all that stuff. So maybe there's a little more time on our plates now that COVID's finally plateaued, I guess. I will say that because I'm sure we're all seeing the increases that we're seeing in Lynnfield here, but that's my take from my position here in Lynnfield.
Great. Thanks, Glenn and Rob. And if there are any questions specific for Lynnfield, you can go ahead and place those in the chat. We will get to questions kind of at the end, just an effort to make sure that we stay on schedule, but go ahead if you have a question now, place it in there and we can come back to it when we get to the question and answer period a little bit later on. And I will turn it over to Captain Cronin and Chris to speak a little bit about what their operations look like in Malden.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Beth. Mayor Dolan, Mayor Christensen says hi. It's been a while. So I'm the Emergency Management Director for the City of Malden, but I'm also the Patrol Commander for the Police Department. So it sort of puts me in a unique position at times, particularly when we're training with the schools with, Alice and Run, Hide, Fight and things like that. So that's uniquely positive. As far as emergency management, I really started this in 2017. I was told I was going to be the emergency management director. Then I had to start getting into ICS, like the fire chief said. I had to, learn about it, see how ICS worked, because I was never really that familiar with it before this. I think when COVID hit in, basically early February 2020, it was a wake-up call because I was kind of just riding the wave for a little bit. We started really looking into our policies, our procedures with emergency management. We started looking at our SEMP plans, which I realized needed a lot of updating, which does require an outrageous amount of time, which when you're doing this as an ancillary position, you don't ever have enough time to really update them fully. I was always concerned with the hazard mitigation plans, making sure that they were current and active. The school emergency operation plans, that became critical. And, as well as all the training that we should do continuously, but with COVID, most of that training got put on hold. So that wasn't very helpful at all. As far as the structure, we didn't have to do any reorganization with our emergency management team because we already had a team in place. Like Mr. Dolan said, we've got Chris Webb, who's the Deputy Emergency Management Director, as well as the Director of Board of Health. We had Chief Bill Sullivan, Bob Knox, the DPW Director, Dr. Carrie Ann Murphy, representing the Malden Public School System, Ron Cochran, the Communications Director, Eric Rubin, our Public Facilities Director, and then myself as the Emergency Management Director. So, we did have that in place. It was really nothing we had to change with that. One thing I can say, I think more of a bottom-up approach, each department within the city sort of immediately started developing their own plans based on their own structures. For instance, here in the police department, we had to develop contingency plans that we never had before. We're not accredited yet. We're on our way to that right now, but we didn't have any policies as far as pandemics and how to respond to them. So I had to reach out to surrounding cities and towns that already were accredited and did have those policies in place. So we adopted most of those, and they dealt with things like employee shortages with COVID, changing our work schedules, protocols for dispatches. Anytime we would go to a call, when we did have the time, you would screen the callers. Is this a presumptive address? Does this address already have COVID? We developed plans that, procedures with officers when they're responding to medical aid calls. They really wouldn't go in unless they really had to. The fire department would go in, the EMTs would go in, and we would kind of stand outside unless we were needed. So just to prevent the possibility of contamination. Equipment was an issue early on, PPE. So much so that at least in the police department, we started issuing PPE daily at roll call just to ration what we had until we could get more equipment in, which did in the beginning, it was scarce. And then all of a sudden we had way too much, a few months into this. So yeah, we made sure officers had plenty of PPE, things in their car to clean the cars after every call, after every shift. Every cruiser was decontaminated. You know, we also developed strict protocols for officers that were feeling ill. We were assigned a doctor at a local hospital who addressed every case, every individual case. Every case had different circumstances. We had never dealt with this before. So this doctor was outstanding to this day. You know, and I do believe he minimized the amount of officers that we had out. At one point, we did have over 20 officers out at one time. We had an entire platoon that was out. So we did have to make other scheduling changes for that as well. On the emergency management side, we did address the city council early on because, believe it or not, most of the city council members were asking the question, what is emergency management and what do you do? As if it never existed before in the city. So, you know, it became important for everybody. You know, so, you know, myself and Chris Webb addressed the city council in February, late February of 2020. And then we also at that time sought out to update our continuity of operation plans because, you know, that had become an issue. Who's going to take whose place if someone can't be there or if something happens to that person? So we jumped on that. We just want to make sure that we were able to provide essential functions throughout the city, like, you know, the DPW, you know, police, fire, you know, EMTs, medical responses. So we looked at, you know, order of succession, you know, continuity of facilities, making sure we had backup facilities in case one wasn't available. Continuity of communications, you know, we relied heavily on Rock Cochran to provide that. You know, vital records management, you know, the issue came up, what happens if we can't pay people? You know, what if the person who's in charge of that can't make it? So we did quickly get that under control. We've got policies and procedures in place right now to address all that. You know, in the midst of COVID, you know, communication was key. We started, you know, I know MAPC, I think it was Tuesdays and Thursdays. I was involved in many of those calls. MEMA, Tuesdays and Thursdays, I think they were an hour apart each day. We participated in those. We received a lot of PPE from MEMA, which we got deliveries from National Guard probably every 2 weeks, which was very helpful. I used some of the EMPG grant to buy a container just to store, you know, more of a strategic stockpile going forward, which is now full. So we've got that ready. The city itself had purchased an extremely large amount of KN95 masks also to have. We met with the mayor weekly and gave him updates. He was he was on top of this. He was ahead of the curve. So we, you know, I serve at the whim of the mayor, and he was on top of this from the very beginning. We would meet, myself, the fire chief, Bill Sullivan, and Cataldo Ambulance. We met often because Cataldo Ambulance, the service that we use, was also, you know, in the middle of this. They were strapped. You know, they were running out of EMTs. They were running out of ambulances. So we did have contingency plans that we worked out with them, and that evolved as time went on. MEMA assigned a rep to us, you know, specifically for any issues that we had, and you know, that's kind of how we dealt with it. I think we fared okay.
I'd agree, but I'm biased. So a little. Where my take on it is a little different, but not too far off. I've been in emergency management from, I don't know, well, as long as we've been doing emergency preparedness work in the health field, I've been the deputy director of emergency management. I think I've been through, or worked with 4 different emergency management directors, and all of them were a little different. Some were firemen, some were police. I don't have a preference to either one. I like Glenn because he's here now, and Bill, plus he's great too. Bill and I went to elementary schools together, so he knows I'm kidding. But for the health department, we were lucky enough that we were in a region that was relatively small. We have basically 5 communities. Depending on what we're working on, it can range from 6 to 7 communities. But for emergency preparedness, it's 5. And we decided very early on that no matter what anybody else said, we're sticking together because there's power in numbers, and the numbers was the population. So we knew if we told them, look, we're servicing 250,000 people, we need to be, considered somewhere in the top of the delivery line. That echoed at DPH, and very early on, we were able to get a deal, I guess is the best way to describe it, on receiving vaccine, because we were going to be vaccinating so many people. I won't fill you in on the deal. It wasn't all that great, but it was a good amount of Pfizer vaccine that would be delivered weekly, as long as we stayed in a regional format. And we did that. We started with Moderna, but we switched to Pfizer. And I think the stocks were high, and no one was really running in to get it. So they promised us a tray a week, which is 1,100, almost 1,100, 1,200 doses. So we could split that between 5 communities in the best way we thought possible, which was let's get the smaller communities a smaller portion and get the clinics up and running so people know where they are. So that's what we did. We kind of phased our clinics till we were ready to run for, each town would have a clinic. Then we'd have a regional clinic. Wakefield was kind enough to put together a large regional spot over in Wakefield. Maurice was a big assist on that. Our nurses went over for, I don't remember how many different times, but a few, not a lot, but a few. They also took a lot of our police officers on the late shift were vaccinated there. So it was a really great spot. I mean, we found that a lot of people who work different hours were able to use that location. I would recommend to everybody that you get one of those. It takes a lot of the brunt of doing it by yourself off. If you can get into a large building like that and man it like they did, and have a good flow, good communication inside and out. Outside, you could get a little hectic too in the parking lot. Folks are coming and going. So you got to watch out for that. But we also did another one here in Malden. We did a regional one here. It wasn't as well attended as one in Wakefield, but it did bring people from everywhere. We had people from Pittsfield drive 4.5 hours to get vaccinated twice. They liked our job. So they liked what we did so much. But I think it was the restaurant they liked. But anyway, we also had from the get-go a very seasoned emergency management team. Glenn and I spend a lot of time together anyway, dealing with school evacuation plans, all that stuff. So he and I have a great relationship. Of course, Chief Sullivan and I know each other from way back, and he's been on the department as long as I've been here, so we know of each other. It's a matter, I think sometimes too, of respect. And I know that these guys said to me, you know what you need to do in your field, we do what we do. And they do. They did it well. They did an incredible job. I got to be honest that one of the main focuses in the beginning was trying to keep people, especially for our continuity operations, was to keep people healthy, and namely police and fire. And I took, I don't know how many calls a day from them, but they were all good, strong questions. And we were able to get the employees to understand that we're going to make it as safe as possible. It's not safe, but we're going to make it as safe as possible. But you have to follow the directions that we're giving you. And to the testament to the leadership in the police and fire, and I'm not just saying this because most of the health people know who I am. They did a great job explaining it to the staffs, and that example really did speak to the community. But people were seeing the police out there all the time. There was no one else out on the streets. There they were. They were going to every call, doing all the things that needed to be done. Glenn was one of the first to come up with the idea we better check on our nursing homes. So we did. Went out and looked at those. There was a little chaos going on, but we were able to confirm that they knew what they were doing and they were getting it done. So we avoided a huge problem there. One of our nursing homes took a harder hit than the others. And that wasn't for anything they did or didn't do. It's just the type of population they had. So from emergency rooms, we went from, from first aid, from senior living to, or assisted living, we went to as well. And then from there, we went to the housing authority. And a conversation with the housing authority, which I think is really what saved us. We've only had 171 deaths, and we have a large elderly population. So I think one of the things that really saved us from having a real disaster was putting no visiting hours or allowed in any of the housing authority buildings. And yeah, there was a lot of blowback. And yes, they called my office, not the housing authority, because the order came from here. But it was well worth it in the long run. And after people realized why we did it and they saw the spike go through, they were grateful that we did it. We had areas outside where they could meet under tents or go smoke or walk their dog or whatever they need to do, or even visit with family. But most folks just got used to using Zoom or FaceTime and things like that, which seemed to be, what helped most. We had a great response from our volunteer groups in the city as far as food delivery. That was something that came to me a little late, as something I should have thought of right off the bat, but I was really focusing on getting the vaccine into the city and stored and all that good stuff. The day after we received our first shipment of vaccine and we finished our clinic, our medical grade refrigerator went down. I don't know if anybody else had the experience of trying to order a refrigerator during COVID, but it took 3 months to get a refrigerator. And DPH was not really helpful in that regard. They wouldn't let us use a regular home refrigerator, but we did. And we stored our vaccines in Melrose Wakefield Hospital, and we picked them up every morning or every afternoon, whatever it might be, before our clinics. I know a shout out to Ruth Clay for helping out with that schedule, because she was the one who managed the distribution from the hospital out to the cities and towns. She did a great job. It was flawless. There were, there had minor issues, but nothing that kept the clinic from happening. So that was good. I think regionally, the clinics went really well, well attended. Malden's were very well attended. Like you say, we had folks from everywhere, out of state, Ipswich, Pittsfield, really far afield, Springfield. Working in Boston, they saw the one place they could go. They have to go to the other side of the city. I'm not on my normal commute, but I can get a vaccine. They came, and police were there the whole time. When we had a clinic, they kind of knew. We'd send the schedule. They'd have details there. Fire would come through. Catalda would try to send somebody over to monitor. We only had them actually available twice to us. And luckily, because we had in those two clinics, we had over 1,000 per. It was like 1,701 and probably close to 1,700 in the other. And we had, thankfully we had no ill effect from vaccinations at any of our clinics. We've got 87% of the population vaccinated. And as Glenn was saying, that's attributable to our communications officer. He did a great job. I did TV shows. Glenn did TV shows with the mayor every week for the first 30 weeks. And then we finished. There's been smatterings of shows, but we finished with a total of 49 shows. I'm up for an Emmy on YouTube, and vote for me. That's all I can say. But those shows really, I think, in my experience, talking to people once we got to clinic, they're like, "Oh, you're the guy on TV. Can I talk to you?" And da da da. And it was a great give and take, and they came with great questions. And a lot of people realized that they had questions. The time to ask them was when the TV show was on, and we got a lot of great questions. We put a lot of people's minds at ease, because we also let them know what we're doing in the background, things they couldn't see that were going on. Talk about the manning of police and fire, and that there were really never any issues about safety or manpower. So because they were very well practiced and they're following their doctor's orders. Some of the other, as far as ICS and all that, we kind of fall into it. I mean, I know Ingrid's going to say a lot more about it, and I think people should listen to it. In a perfect world, we would be as organized as New York City or LA County or someplace like that. But we really should, as a community or a state, really start to think about enacting the true form of it, and that maybe it does have to be county-wide or a regional thing, so that you can have a body that stands up every time there's an emergency, and they're training on it, and they're looking at they know the resources in the county or in the region, and they call and put demand on it. You know, or they're going to call public health. We're going to get someone from the region who's public health. They're going to be sitting up there as well, saying where and when we're going to start the regional clinics and how we're going to handle the vaccine and all of that good stuff. But you're going to know all that ahead of time. That's the beauty of having a complete ICS plan and people assigned to jobs that just solely based on the fact that they're an employee in the city that we're working. We did see some of our employees melt away. We thought we were going to have a lot more support, you know, from the clerical side than we did. We were lucky that we have a strong relationship with our school nurses. They do not fall under the Board of Health, but we do provide quarterly training for the nurses as part of, you know, just the support package that we give. And those relationships held the day. The nurses came in at the very early stages and did all the contact tracing. We sat in an office down the street from this city hall, which used to be our old city hall. And we'd have as many as 10 school nurses doing contact tracing for 12 hours a day. And they came every day, Saturdays, whatever it took. And we were really in great shape. And that kind of transferred over. When the vaccine got there, they were the same people who stepped up and started vaccinating. People that took their place was our Medical Reserve Corps and some volunteers. And I can't say enough about the volunteers in this community. I think it's fair to say that a lot of things might not have gotten done, or some underserved people would not have been reached for any kind of service, medical service. Prescription drugs were a big question, you know, were a big issue in the beginning days. No one wanted to go out to the pharmacy. The pharmacies weren't open, whatever their thought process was. But through the volunteers, we got food, water, drugs, whatever needed to be delivered got delivered. And it's a testament to the work that Glenn put together, and that the teen center was a big help. The Asian American Association from Malden, incredible work, absolutely incredible work. I'm going to leave people out. The Haitian community was very involved and helped us get our vaccination numbers up. It was great. But I think in hindsight, looking back, I think I would have been more comfortable with a more hardcore ICS understanding throughout our region. And I'm just talking about our 5 cities and towns. Some folks in very early on weren't allowed to make certain decisions that needed to be made. And a day or two in the early days was forever. You know, you didn't know what was coming down the road next. And so if had there been a firm ICS organizational chart that people could refer to, I think a lot of questions would have gone to the right places and other people would have been free to do the work they needed to do. I can only speak for myself. I spent inordinate amounts of time on telephones and computers that really didn't need to happen in hindsight. We had a great schedule going. We worked crazy, stupid hours, but we got it done. I think it would have been a lot easier on everybody involved had we had more participation through ICS and staff being assigned ICS positions and then being trained and knowing where they need to show up. And that would have helped us incredibly. We were the health department staff was actually the only staff that answered the phones for people when it came time to register. We actually set up a phone bank here in our office. Luckily, it was brand new at the time, so we didn't mind. And we sat here morning, noon, and night taking phone calls from people and actually registering them online. And there was no outside support for that. We couldn't find anybody that wanted to do it or anybody that would come in to take the training. So that was the early days. Of course, then everybody started to learn, and we got MRC volunteers to come over and do a lot of our backup information, all our contact tracing. It all kind of filled in, but there were gaps that were frustrating. Well, I think overall Malden held up really, really well, and it just goes to the fact that the mayor put his faith in the people that he assigned, and he asked us a lot of questions gave very few orders and let us run with it. It was a very professional work environment the whole time, believe it or not. It was easy to do. I knew where I stood all the time with the mayor and emergency management, police and fire, as well as the Board of Health and the state. Could have done with a few less, weekly phone calls or Zoom calls. I would, like Glenn was saying, I had the luxury of doing the 2 DPH calls, the 1 MAPC call, the bunch of equity community calls, and the FEMA calls. And I have to take the FEMA calls because in this community, I do the reimbursement for every emergency. So those expenses that go out, it's my job to corral them back in and file the paperwork for reimbursement. Luckily, Malden will be receiving $1.6 million, and we should be getting that hopefully any day now. But I'll leave you with this: get with the region, trust each other, work with each other, find a regional spot, support the regional location or 2 if that's what you have, but you have to be able to support it. I found that I think if our 5 communities could have had 1 regional place all the time, we would have just kept it open like a hospital. We could have, find another place to put a shelter. We could have moved people in and around those things, but we're all operating individual shelters, individual hotels, and all this stuff. And if we'd had 10 facilities that we had to manage for the whole period, we would have been rotating people through all those facilities based on their skill set using the ICS plan. So that's what I would recommend. Regional, work as a region, regionalize your service locations, stay in contact with your emergency management director, make sure if you get a new one that they understand what's really required, not what they've heard, because everybody's a little surprised when they first get in the seat that, wow, there's a lot of work and there's not a lot of time to do it. And I've heard that from every emergency management director I've ever worked with, because it's true. And we need to formalize that, as Mayor Dolan had said, to get people, make it a professional slot, even if it has to be a countywide position. I think that it makes a whole lot more sense than what we just went through. And of course, I'm going to take the advantage of the situation here and say that the politics at the beginning of this helped nobody, right? And it put more doubt in people's minds than we're used to seeing at the time of an emergency. I can remember when H1N1 was here, everybody was behind it. It's the American thing to do, get yourself protected, lead the way, all that. We didn't have that this time around. And we're still fighting it, and it's costing us insane amounts of money to reach people who don't want to be reached right now. I mean, that's just my opinion. But we keep the drum rolling and we try and get people in vaccinate. We're doing okay. But if we were if emergency management was a larger portion of what we do, or was its own entity, like a fire department, police department, emergency management, people would have a better understanding of where to go to get their information, how much resources available, and their anxiety level drops, which is another thing when you're dealing with mass casualties or vaccinations or whatever else. You've got to control the anxiety, the walking well, and the walking wounded as well. It's a huge undertaking. I don't know what a lot of other communities went through. I can only speak for the 5 that I was working with in daily. I think they all did a great job. I think we all found ourselves challenged by the fact that not all communities have firmly embraced ICS. They talk about it, but then when the balloon goes up, they just forget all about it and say, look, this is my position. I'm making the decisions here. And that really makes it hard for anybody else who's put time into the plans, drilled on it, and had more experience in making those decisions. Stay with the program. You know what I mean? How to lose your best information is by excluding them. No matter what discipline they're from, They should have, if they're there, they should have a voice. And that's really all I've got. I mean, I'm glad it's in a pause. I say that to everybody. I do believe that we probably will see another uptick in the fall, and we're preparing for it. And I would suggest everybody else do the same, and get with your emergency management director and become friends, have lunch, and lean into it, because it's not going away anytime soon.
Great. Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Captain Cronin. Appreciate that intake from Malden and kind of what you guys experienced. As you guys can see, kind of, the approaches in the two communities, while they were similar, they had some differences too that made them both equally successful in their response efforts. I think, as you can see, probably though, they both mentioned some aspects of a team collaboration in their response, and then the trust that both communities had with their leadership, that kind of aided in them being successful in their roles. So again, if there are any questions for Chris or Glenn, go ahead and you can put those in the chat. We will get to them a little bit later on. Dan, if you can go ahead and pull up the slides for a moment. We're going to, while Dan pulls those up, so we're going to transition over. So while we've heard from our two local municipal teams, we now are going to hear from Ingrid, who is going to bring us a different perspective. If you go to the next slide, kind of an outsider's perspective, if you will. She'll most recently had experience with the response to COVID in New York City, but I mean, amongst all of it, as I'm sure she'll explain, she has a vast experience in emergencies and different incidents over the years, to kind of speak about things that she has seen in her experiences, and how we could maybe take some of those things that have been done and maybe we can transition them here in our municipalities. They may not look exactly the same, but I think there's definitely things that we can take in scale to help us in our region. So if you want to stop sharing, Dan, if Ingrid has some slides she's going to share.
I don't see the option for me to share. Hold on.
Ingrid, it should be at the bottom of your screen. It's usually highlighted in green.
Ah, yes, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Screen. It should be. Let me know if you can see it. Is it popping up okay for everyone?
Yes, we can see those.
Okay. Great. So thank you for having me. Thank you for that introduction. And like everyone said, I do want to highlight that I completely understand that some of the just kind of points that I'm making here and suggestions that I'll be putting out there really are based on my experience with doing emergency management in New York City. It's kind of where I essentially learned emergency management. And so I'm well aware of the fact that sometimes when I say staff, in my head, I'm thinking of the Department of Health in New York City, and that's about, I think we're up to about 7,000 people. So when I think about just the human resources that are available to us during a response, it's a much, much larger number. But I did want to share with you guys some of the concepts that we focus on that really are not focused on how many people are available to you, but rather just ideas that you can consider putting into place for the long term. Making changes to how you respond to emergencies is something that just takes so much time. And in the beginning, it doesn't always feel worthwhile, but you see kind of how beneficial it was as you deal with more and more and more responses. So I have very few slides for you guys. I think it's about 3 or 4. I just thought it would kind of help anchor our conversation today. And so the top 3 things that I thought were most important to talk about were, workforce development, essentially, who do you have available to you? What do they know and do? And how is that shared and replicated? And then collaboration, what resources are available to you internally as well as externally? And then lessons learned, how are you documenting what happened so that you can either repeat it for the next response or avoid it for the next one? So with that, there we go. Make sure that's working. So with workforce development, the first thing that I would have to just like put out there is that in the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene in New York City, every single person is assigned to an emergency response role. And this includes our continuity of operations work, which is essentially what keeps the agency running and maintains our essential services. As you all know, ICS is something that is scalable. And in New York City, we make sure that it's also a familiar system at various staff levels. So at the leadership level, at the director manager level, entry level, even people who are working with us on a contract, and even some interns. The interns part is a little bit newer and it's really specific to COVID because generally we like to keep interns out of emergencies because of how unstructured the hours can be. Our assignments are cataloged in what's called our our employee database, and those numbers are reviewed regularly. So although ICS is quote unquote owned in the Department of Health by the Office of Emergency Preparedness and Response, it does become a collaborative effort agency-wide. And we also make sure that emergency preparedness and response is a part of all of our staff's tasks and standards. And I don't know if that's something that is feasible for you guys, and it's not something that we always had. I think that we had to fight for it. And to be frank, that fight started even before I reached the health department, but we definitely got it to a point where, you know, every time someone is going into their yearly performance review, if there's been an emergency response that year, that's one of the things that you're talking about, just how well you stepped up as part of the health department to be a part of that response. If you learned anything, if you gained additional skills, and how you can maybe use that in the next year if it's something that you're interested in doing. ICS utilization for us, ICS is a first thought for almost every single response. Obviously, COVID has been our longest one thus far. It beat out Zika, but I remember that we even stood up ICS for about 24 hours for a hurricane back in 2015. I want to say it was Hurricane Joaquin, and that hurricane never touched down. And even in a situation like that, it doesn't feel like a waste to us to have had everyone step into their roles, get ready to use the concept, because even if you end up not using it and you stand down in 24 hours, that 24 hours counts as practice for a couple of people who may not have been pulled into the last response or maybe the last two responses. And it's just a good refresher for them. So every time you can use ICS, it is essentially worth it to use ICS. The next thing that's really important in New York City is training. So to start, emergency preparedness is a part of our general staff orientation at the health department, which means although general orientation doesn't always happen, you know, that first week, sometimes even the first month that you're there, I think you're given about 90 days to get through it. There is someone from the Office of Emergency Preparedness and Response who comes and explains to you that no matter what job you've taken on in the health department, emergency preparedness and emergency response is going to show up for you. It may not show up in what you do day to day, but it pops up when there's a response, because we need everyone who's in the health department to understand that the work that they're doing day to day is not separate from the work that emergency managers do, right? It's essentially work that is augmented during a response. And so that work is then done with less time, with more eyes on you, with fewer resources available to you. It's just having people understand that you are all experts in everything that you're doing. And sometimes we'll call on you to be stressed out experts because there'll be a response where we need your support. So training happens differently at different levels. So for leadership, they have mandatory training requirements, and those show up when they become leadership as well as annually. So things like ICS and FEMA standard trainings, having quarterly trainings that are run by OPER, having exercises that they have to participate in. And then we also acknowledge, like I was saying before, that sometimes the emergency is the training, and it's worthwhile to be creative with the types and the timelines of your training, because the fact that an emergency is training means that you have to have at least a few people during a response who are paying attention to the pace of the response, because when you have something that's happening very slowly, that's actually the perfect time to pull in someone who maybe hasn't had a chance to be a section chief as often, someone who hasn't had a chance to be a desk officer as often. You know that they won't be as stressed and they won't have as much pressure on them, but they should still be pulled into the entire experience so that they understand what could happen if they were pulled in during an emergency like COVID. So essentially, slower weeks are great for learning, and for a response as long as COVID. Once you kind of keep that in mind, you're able to pull in more staff because you focus on doing some field promotions, and you're also able to accept that even if your training schedule has been disrupted, you haven't lost the opportunity to keep training people. And then of course you want to make sure, one of the things we always do is just, we maintain well-developed tabletops, full-scale exercises, quizzes. We have tried in the most recent years to make our training available online, and I fully acknowledge that the development work involved in making training available online is its own hurdle. It takes months of time. It takes being able to find the right person who can translate what the training looks like in person to making it worthwhile online. It takes a lot of testing from different people at different levels. And so I know that it's not something that is easy to do, but again, a lot of the things that we have in place in New York City were meant to become more and more helpful in the long term. And then training also involves having internal and external responsibilities. So when you think about the external part, you want to consider the support that's available to you. Sometimes it means pulling in some consultants and seeing if they can help you with development, with facilitation, with real-time evaluation. Sometimes it means that when you're running a tabletop or a full scale, you pull in some local agency partners and you ask them to join on the day that you're having the exercise. And you want to also make sure that you're varying the representative that's there, because it's very easy to always call on your guy or your gal because you've worked with them before, and that's a beautiful thing because you've developed a really good relationship. But you know that new people can be hired at any time. You need to be able to develop the same relationships with them as well, because that's what makes your responses keep running smoothly. But additionally, you want everyone in another agency to understand where they fall in your specific ICS activation process and sequence. Things that we kept doing, practicing major regional plans. For example, we use the CHASP, which is the Citywide Health and Safety Plan. That's how our agencies as a whole, they just plan, organize operations and resources to address multi-agency health and safety needs during emergencies. We use things like SIMS, which is essentially Citywide Incident Management System. It's just the New York City specific version of NIM. So it's how we figure out if we're doing single or unified command for a response. And then the thing is that so people in the health department who don't work in OPER definitely get to a point where they would get frustrated with OPER, because we talk about emergencies all the time, year round. We're always in someone's ear. We're always talking to some assistant commissioner telling them like, your staff is not assigned correctly, your training levels are too low, something like that. But it's worth it to keep doing that because there's an ease of implementation that comes with formalizing the expected responsibilities during response, right? And that is key at both the staff level as well as at the agency-wide level, because it sets you up with just a baseline founding, and it should be the same for the most part, almost every single time. Very briefly, one of the things that I want to talk about here as we kind of get into collaboration, which I think I've touched on a little bit, as I tell you how we collaborate across our bureaus and departments and jurisdictions and state lines. One of the things New York City did, oh wow, it must have been 5-ish years Now, we sent some teams down to the US Virgin Islands when they were dealing with Hurricanes Irma and Maria, and even that ended up being a training opportunity, a learning opportunity for us. And so I want to highlight that because I think that sometimes when you are either asking for help in a way to collaborate from other jurisdictions, or you're offering help, we're so focused on what the end result is in those positions that we forget that it's another way for us to also critically assess the way we're doing our own response work. So for example, one of the things that I learned in the US Virgin Islands is that coming from New York City, I think about all of our backup systems for response as electronic ones. And I remember someone in the Virgin Islands telling me, that's great. That's because you have a really reliable grid. We don't. So our backup systems are on paper, and it doesn't seem very smart to you because you imagine that paper can disintegrate, there can be a fire, there can be a flood, whatever. She said, we imagine that our power grid can go down, and then everyone is useless in the office anyway because we can't call each other, our cell phones aren't working, we can't email each other, our computers aren't working, and we have to wait until the next day when the system is back up. We need to be able to go into a room, grab some paperwork, and go home and keep working and still be productive. And for me, that was a really useful moment because it reminded me that in every response, you're showing up with a spirit of support and humility so that you have the time and the awareness to both lend a hand, because there are things that you guys are talking about right now that I don't always think about in terms of emergency management in New York City. You guys have been able to deal with this response with so much fewer staff. To be frank, that might have crippled New York City. And so that's something to consider when we think about just the longer term ways that response needs to be improved nationally. So I did very briefly talk to you guys about the employee data bank, and I wanted to give you guys a visual of what that means. So this is essentially what my EDB page looked like when I was at the health department. And what I want to highlight for you guys here is that this represents how we made emergency management just a natural part of an employee's day-to-day world, right? So on the far right, in the section called emergency response role, it would just list for people, this is what your emergency response role was, this is who you should reach out to if you had questions, this is what it meant for you to be in this group. It even gave their pod position as well as their pod location so that they could always find it easily. The column right before it, I don't know if you can see that it says my employee survey. That was called our skill survey. And it's where we kind of gathered information about every single person in the health department to understand what skills were you bringing in as a new employee and where could we use those skills in ICS. It made it a lot easier to immediately assign people to roles, which is not to say that those roles didn't change. They could change because of interest. They could change because you had a poor experience, maybe in the liaison group versus the environmental group. And so we were always open to moving people around. But as a start, once you came in, you had about 90 days to fill out that survey, and we would start to place you in the ICS org chart where it would make sense for you to do some work. And then of course, the first column, if you look on the bottom left there, that was where compliance was listed. And so, like I said, training was pretty important. And we got to the point where human resources and admin agreed with us. And so if you weren't compliant with the trainings that were specific to emergency management, I guess I wasn't at one point, you got a little red notice on your EDB page. And it was just a way to remind you, we get it, you don't do this every day, but please just have it sit somewhere in your mind so that when we do call on you, it's not as shocking, it's not as difficult, and you can just step into it. Maybe you get a little handoff document from the person who was in the role before you. It just reminds you how to do this, and then you step back out when your shift is over. And then lastly, I just wanted to talk very quickly about lessons learned and how we kind of keep track of our lessons learned. So we catalog our corrective actions in something called the corrective actions database, the CARD. For us, they ended up being just an initial checkpoint for the next year's preparedness goals. And essentially corrective actions were a key preparedness element for us. And these were assigned to points of contact who would then be responsible for the overall movement on a corrective action. And they helped us identify the right internal partners for specific preparedness planning goals. And then they helped us understand where we improved, where we needed to improve, and then a few pain points, of course. And so just to be clear, when I say pain points, I mean the corrective actions that just don't get solved, right? We had corrective actions from as far back as maybe Legionella that we just like could not get a handle on, couldn't solve them. And at one point a few years ago, we deleted, in an appropriate manner, of course, a lot of corrective actions with the understanding that we trusted our system and that it was possible that either our work thus far had addressed the corrective actions, or we would find just a different solution if and when they returned with different hazards that showed up. So I think that maintaining some kind of system or process that tracks your lessons learned, tracks your plans and policies. I don't know in you guys' cases if it's an individual who ends up being responsible for all of the plans, who knows where they live, who knows how recently they were reviewed, who knows what the review process is for them and how long it takes from that initial decision to review to that final check that maybe it's your mayor that says, okay, this plan is good, this is what we're doing and using moving forward. But we have found that that has been a really useful way to go from actual plans and policies to implementation of plans and policies, because making that jump is difficult. There's a lot of times when you have these beautifully written plans, these beautifully written policies, no one reads them, no one memorizes them, and no one remembers how to use them when the time calls for it. So that like everything ends up working together overall, right? Like you have to train on the policies, you have to practice them, you have to, in the middle of practice, decide that they were written really poorly and that you have to pause an exercise and maybe do a review, things like that. It happens to all of us. I think that in New York City, we are by no means perfect in how we deal with responses. I think it was you, Chris, that talked about how some of your staff disappeared when the response started and you kind of lost the ability to use them. The same thing has happened on the tail end in New York City, right? I think that nationally, a lot of people have heard of the Great Resignation, and that impacted us as well. People just were very burnt out or were very frustrated. And so every time that there is a response, there's always something that you've done well, but there's always something that you can review. But at baseline, at least in New York, ICS is always something that we use. Having staff be assigned is always something that won't change. Knowing how to just open up the system and then close it back up, that scalability is something that won't change. And I mean, I'm hoping that what I've shared with you guys, obviously I'm happy to answer questions and get into more details as time allows, but I'm hoping that that has been helpful. These were ultimately just suggestions and thoughts, but just some final key points that I would put out there would be to really think about how to pull in community partners. That's something that New York City is still figuring out and struggling with a little bit. Is just that community engagement piece and how it plays a role in both public health and in emergency management. Taking the time to just critically review your process and your documentation before the next big emergency. Acknowledging that you've been doing difficult and painful work, much of it unprecedented and with limited resources, and remembering that some of the limitations are out of your control, and so it doesn't really make sense to focus on those. It's just you develop workarounds for those and you keep focusing on the parts of the system that you can control and that you can improve. And then lastly, remembering, that recovery is not just about you looking outwardly to the people that you serve, because you are also members of the communities that you support during every single response. So that would kind of be, in a nutshell, how I would share what New York City did.
Thanks, Ingrid. Great. So I'll go ahead and if anybody has any questions for either Ingrid or for any of our municipal teams, for Chris or Captain Cronin or Chief Davis or Rob, you can go ahead and either use the raise your hand feature, or you can go ahead and place those in the chat. Any questions on anything that they mentioned or anything about their responses, or how things were done, or any discussion points you would like anyone to elaborate on. I think while we go ahead and wait for those questions to come in through the chat, I think Dan has some points to bring up for our panelists.
Hey, everyone, and thanks again for all of you for taking the time out of your days to join us, and thank you to all the panelists for providing all that great information. I guess just one question to sort of kick it off would be, what advice would you offer other EMDs in regards to coordinating a response that requires other municipal departments? What would be some like high-level, quick-hitting things that you would suggest other EMDs do?
Well, I think we spoke at it, Dan. Everyone's touched on the ICS system, and I think truly that helped us here in Lynnfield. Again, like I said, there was no titles with that. It was purely role. There was no egos involved. We truly collaborated across all the important department heads, and we included everybody. The people that we didn't speak of early on, we reached out to all of our local clergy. And we had a representative of all the local clergy so they could reach out to their people. Local businesses, we had a representative from Market Street here in Lynnfield that was part of our team, so they could help us reach out to the business entities. And I think that was the key, was a strong ICS plan. We could stick to that. We could scale it large when we needed to. We scaled it down when we needed to. We had ad hoc members that we could add also. We had, obviously the director of our senior center, and we had our local housing authority board members, and they were able to speak to their people also. But I think that teamwork, collaboration across the department heads was the biggest thing that helped us through Lynnfield.
I would say, not being a public safety person myself, empathy for where people stand and what their backgrounds are. Oftentimes, you have a situation and be it a police officer, a firefighter, a chief, oftentimes have different experiences and look at things differently than maybe someone who runs DPW or the senior center director, or even a third party member of clergy. Just have empathy. Everyone has someone to report to. Everyone comes from a different perspective. Everyone speaks differently in terms of tone. Everyone has different anxiety issues, and really going to people where they stand and having understanding of them is very effective, and people appreciate that. I think that's one thing sometimes that in a crisis that we forget, in that although it's a crisis with an issue at hand, we're all still humans and we come from different places, and that has to be respected. I think in the long run, creates a better team.
Yeah, if I could, ask kind of follow up. I know Chief Davis and Rob, you guys both mentioned, I think the team aspect and team approach to response, right? Probably a lot of people on the call. It's not a new approach to a lot of people, but I think the key thing that you both have mentioned is you both mentioned egos and getting rid of egos. What, to Rob, what would you say if you had someone else come to you and say, like, how did you do it? How did you get everyone to just, you got a lot of people on the team that are in their quote day jobs. They're in a leadership position. Usually, for fire chief is a leadership position. How do you get them to just say, we're gonna check the egos at the door?
Well, I think a lot of it is the personality of the person at the top. I mean, myself or Glenn, as you can just your brief experience with Glenn seems to be is usually a very calm, that voice that he's speaking with right now and the mannerism is how he is in a crisis. I ask people to listen, you know what I mean? Not to think of the next thing they want to say, but to really listen. And that takes some training, and it takes some self-reflection. But I have seen so many times, particularly in a school situation, that someone will come in and order a principal or order a superintendent, or vice versa, superintendent saying, I want you people out of here. This is my school. And that immediately is destructive. If we can just slow down and stop and be very, it sounds a bit new age, but in the moment, and be present and listen and go slower rather than quicker. And it's okay to say, I don't know what to do, and to be somewhat vulnerable and to listen to people that may have a different perspective or a different background, right? And I think that's where you go. And being like a former politician, you have to also think about other things, not just votes, but perception in the community, those type of things that also have to be respected. We all come from a certain place. The superintendent is worried about the school committee. The health director is worried about the board of health. I might be concerned about the selectmen. A lieutenant might be concerned about his captain or his chief. So, I just think that type of slowing down and being conscious of everyone at the table is super important. It's rare. It is rare.
Great, thanks. Yeah, Dan, we did have, Glenn, was there anything you want to add or else?
No, I think, there was a lot of I don't know moments. And I think that was the important part. It was spoken to by everybody here today that COVID was brand new to all of us. There was a lot of times we looked at each other and said, I don't know what to do. And we worked through it collaboratively, listening, a lot of listening. What are your opinions? And we didn't always agree 100%. And we knew that going into this, that majority would rule, but if you were on the losing end of the decision being made, that you bought into that. And when it went out to the public, we went out as a united force, whether the winner or the loser of the decision that was made. We didn't say, oh, I don't agree with that. Rob made that decision. There was none of that. There was no undermining. And I think that's the important part there.
Yeah, there was one question in the chat that came in. Would there be any advice on what initial training is helpful when starting / revitalizing an emergency management team?
I actually would recommend just going to the FEMA website. Even if you just told someone to start at ICS 100, 200, 300, 400, have everyone have a baseline where they are thinking about ICS in a similar way and understanding it in a similar way. You want everyone to understand the foundational parts of ICS before you start to change the training to be more specific to the resources that are available to you, or to the specific way that you do ICS in your own municipality or agency. But I think just using the trainings that are already there and have already been developed is always a really good start. And then if you have to, perhaps you do the trainings in person so that you can add in, a conversation here and there where you explain how you dealt with the response. But again, just start with what is tried and true.
Thank you for that, Ingrid. Anyone else have any more insight they'd like to share in regards to that question?
Yeah, Dan, again, as a fairly new fire chief, only 3 years in, like I said, I had reached out to my MEMA counterparts. They were super helpful. They have helped other people set up their emergency management teams. They gave me guidance. They gave me tips on who to involve as part of the team as we were building it. And I think what we're doing here today in the group that you guys have formed with the MAPC, reach out to your neighbors. Your neighbors are doing good things. And, Rob spoke to that. Let's not have those hard formed borders across communities. Reach out to your communities. Our region coalition in 3B it was super helpful. During COVID, we lost our health director for a period of time, and that was a vacant spot. I learned more about being a health director than I ever want to or ever needed to know. But the collaborative team around me was so strong. You know, our partners reached out. They took me in as a fire chief amongst health directors, which typically don't always mesh. They don't always have the same thought process or the same pathway. And they brought me in as if I had been with them for a long time. And that was huge to me. So reach out to your neighbors, reach out to your partners. What have they done successful? What can you build on that they've accomplished or found opportunities for improvement? That's the important thing. You know, lessons learned. Ingrid spoke to that. What didn't work? What wouldn't you do again if you had to do it again?
That's great. Thank you, Chief, for that. One other question that I have for you all is, what advice would you offer municipal leadership in regards to the importance of really developing good relationships with EMDs? And maybe Rob, you can speak to that a little bit, but you know, maybe everyone else on the flip side, you know, we often see that disconnect, as you all mentioned, between leadership and EMDs. So you guys have seemingly developed really good relationships across the board. So, you know, what advice could you offer on to everyone else in regards to that?
Well, I think, you know, people have such a short memory. Oftentimes when there's a trauma, a municipal trauma of whatever it may be, people, they may rally, they may do a GoFundMe page for a family that has had a fire during the floods, people helped, but then people forget. I think COVID has changed so many different things. I think it's almost an event like 9/11 where it really will change almost everything. I have a 7th grader and a 16-year-old who, you know, if you talk to people in your school departments, they're doing okay, but there are major issues with a lot of kids that have never had issues before that we can't explain. The way we live our life now is going to come back to normal a little bit, but there's going to be permanent changes. In fact, right now we're on a permanent change, Zoom, you know, that your opportunity right now, each of you, to propel and advance emergency management, I think you have never had more clearer ears from both people in legislative and executive positions in government. It's what we do with it that I think is you know, what advances we can make. But I think we're forced to change. I don't think anything is going to be truly the same, very much like 9/11. And who knows what we'll be dealing with in years to come, right? And recognition of the world we live in right now, which, you know, I wasn't around during the Cuban Missile Crisis or other great times, you know, challenging times in American history. But in terms of world history, there's a lot going on here. And there's a lot of things to think about, from cyber to water to global warming to mental health issues, that it is a time for unity, both within town and city governments, the state and federal and local governments, amongst churches and places of worship. You know, it is an opportunity to bring people together in a time where a lot of people are very divided politically, not just by R&D, but, you know, how we want to move forward. So it's an opportunity also to bring in good people into government service. We know that so many people are retiring, in that whether or not we have people who can replace them, maybe this issue drives people into public service and we get more good people, you know.
Thank you for that, Rob. Anyone else have any other insight on regards to that from sort of the EMD side and how to better establish relationships with town management?
I just got, Dan, I just got, you know, one thing to mention on that. I know that, you know, the state offers some courses on municipal, you know, leadership, you know, namely city councils, getting them involved with basic level ICS. I know those courses have been offered in the past. I'm pretty sure Mayor Christensen had to actually take on one of those so that he has an idea of what, you know, is involved with emergency management. So I think maybe getting, some of the city council members involved, it'd be a good way to, establish that, that type of relationship.
Dan, I have a question, and for the group, hi, I'm Barb McCarthy. I have a dual role. I'm on incident command here at the hospital, at Beverly Hospital, but I also am the vice chair of the Board of Health in Rockport. So I'm wondering what your role is, your collaborative role is with your local healthcare institutions. Do you sit on each other's incident commands? Is there a dotted line back and forth? How does that work for all of you? I'd be interested in hearing that. I want to make sure we sort of get ours straight without really overlapping too much.
Well, I can speak for our region, 3E. We'd have a great relationship with the main hospital groups, which are the Melrose Wakefield Hospital and the Cambridge Health Alliance hospital system. They were both instrumental in handling our vaccines and standing up testing sites for us, so that there's no way we would have been able to do it.
Did they sit on your incident? Was there
nice
someone
that they
on your
took on those
incident command?
No, what it was is I would be going to their meetings. Actually, there was 3 out of the 5 of us, there's 3-person group that sat in on different hospital boards, and they told us what their needs were. We told them in the very early days what we projected our needs to be, which was obviously around the vaccine. It was 2 conversations and done. And we just kept going from that point. And they were in on all of our vaccination programs. We shared all of our thoughts and schedules with them. We even actually set up one clinic for them because we just couldn't get to it. So they were kind enough to step in. Cambridge Healthcare stepped in and took care of that one for us. Taldo Ambulances did the same thing, because we were all talking to each other at least twice a week, sometimes more. So we weren't as formal as sitting in the incident command, but we were in scheduled meetings every week.
Okay. Thank you. And Glenn Davis, what about with Burlington?
So
About with Medical Center?
Yeah, so similarly, pre-hospital, we are the EMS provider for the town of Lynnfield. So we obviously communicate and collaborate all the time with our regional OEMS director. We're part of the HMCC, so we do a lot of pre-hospital. Without having a hospital in our community, we collaborated and spoke all the time. Union has since closed, but Salem Hospital is a point of entry for us. Melrose Wakefield is actually our closest point of entry currently. And we utilize Leahy Clinic Burlington for a lot of stuff, being right on the highway for trauma point of entry and things like that. So we did speak constantly with those providers. They weren't formally on my ICS team, sorry. But constant collaboration, especially through OEMS.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for the question. Anyone else have any other questions or anything they'd like to share? Feel free to raise your hand or toss it in the chat. Beth, I'm not seeing any other questions, and it looks like nobody else has their hand raised.
Yeah, so if you want to go ahead and pull the slides up. So while Dan goes ahead and pulls those slides up, so we wanted to kind of discuss next steps and kind of where do we go from here? What can we do to assist you all with this? So we've been working internally at MAPC within the Municipal Collaboration Department, and we have developed the emergency preparedness practice. So our goal with developing this practice is recognizing that most of the time our municipal emergency management directors, as mentioned before, they're part-time, or they are the police chief, the fire chief, the public health director. They're wearing a lot of different hats, and they get a small stipend to do another full-time job. So recognizing that there's a gap there, and again, as we've all mentioned on this call already several times, the need to expand the emergency management departments within municipalities. So our goal with the practice is to be able to step in and assist municipalities in filling those gaps. So coming to meet them kind of where they are, where they're at. Our goal is not to come in and replace the local emergency management directors, because those individuals know the municipalities well. They know the ins and outs of those municipalities. What we want to do is we want to assist municipalities with building their capacity through a variety of different ways. Whether that means, we've heard a lot of updating your SEMP plans, right? They're time consuming, they're long. There's not a lot of time to do that. Your hazard mitigation plans, again, another plan, the COOP plans, all these plans that are very time consuming and important, but again, it's hard to find the time to do those when you have another full-time job. And also on top of that, not only updating it, but I think it was mentioned, it's great to have a plan, but if the plan doesn't actually work, then the plan is useless. Or if you haven't tested it or looked at it, and make sure, kind of to Rob's point, like, are the small things taken care of in that plan? Do you have those small things worked out that you may not necessarily think about until you go ahead and actually activate the plan? So we want to go ahead and we want to help, whether it be working, updating plans, whether it be, and Dan, you can go ahead to the next slide, please. Whether it be through workshop development, whether it be through trainings and exercises. Again, I think that was a common thing that we have heard throughout here too, enhancing the availabilities for trainings. Again, we all know the importance of all of these different areas to improve on, but finding the time when you are wearing multiple different hats, there is no time. So we want to come in, and that's what the goal behind the practice is, to go ahead and assist municipalities where they're at and help them increase their capacity. So also another reason why we want to build this practice is within the MAPC and within the Municipal Collaboration Department, we work collaboratively with multiple different municipalities and multiple different stakeholders. So through our work with not only the Homeland Security funds, but the Health and Medical Coordinating Coalition, and a lot of other projects that we do, the need to bring in multiple partners and multiple agencies to do a workshop or to do an agency, that's something that we recognize, and we have a lot of those relationships already built that we can help bring those partners to the table during these events to update plans and to do exercises and to do trainings. So that's really kind of the goal behind the project. I'm going to transition to Mark Fine, the Director of Municipal Collaborations, who, because I know a top question, and Dan, you can pull the slides down if you want. I know a question everyone will have, a few questions. I know one of them will be about funding and how do municipalities pay for this and support this. So definitely something that Mark can speak to and elaborate a little bit more about how we look forward to assisting the municipalities.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. But yeah, I mean, as an agency, we offer communities technical assistance on a variety of things, and many of your communities, have used the agency for a variety of areas of support. Emergency preparedness is now one of those that we can offer technical assistance on. And as far as funding goes, there's a number of different potential pathways. First action really is to tell us if you have an interest in receiving some support, and then we can think about with you what that type of funding could look like. Some cases it could be, there might be some municipal resources available, but if not, there are a variety of grants and other programs that potentially could support this work. As mentioned, the EPMG grant, the Emergency Preparedness Management Grant, which is a federal program that comes through the state MEMA, and every community receives. That has provided funding to some communities who then use it to bring us in to help update their emergency management plans. For instance, I know the community compact was mentioned. They do have best practices specifically relating to emergency management. They also have practices that kind of overlap with public health. So you could kind of touch a few bases using the community compact. And in some cases, they provide funding to the communities for that as well. It's a state program, and, we know how to work with communities to access those funds. And, there's a number of other shared service grants and regional efficiency grants that the state also offers, where some emergency management programs could be supported. So, yeah, there's a variety of options, and, in the end, we kind of want to tell you, like, not to worry about it. The first thing you should do if you're interested in getting kind of our support is to give us a call and, get in touch with Dan and Beth, and then we will, we'll talk to you and see what we can work out. We're here to help, and, we really look forward to providing support for you in this important area. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so, kind of with that, I will, I'll be sharing that one page PDF with everyone that attended. I'll send it out via email. We are going to offer some office hours. I'll put the link to register in the chat. We're going to offer them tomorrow and Thursday. I will also email everyone all this information as well. So in the event you would like to get more information on the practice, or if a question comes up between now and then, please feel free to go ahead, register. You don't need to attend the entire hour. Please just pop in when you can. And we really want to assist you all in any way that we can. So again, even if you're not too sure about the details of the project or the what you have going on, if you bring it to us, we can see kind of where we can fit in and what we can leverage. And we also have the ability to leverage the other departments within MAPC, which is a pretty large benefit, because we have legal, transportation, our public health department, we have data services. So again, we not only can bring and enhance the emergency preparedness, but we can bring those other specialties in as well if the area or the project touches it. So again, I want to thank everyone and our speakers for attending today. I will follow up with the links for the office hours and for the PDF. And please be in touch with myself or Dan if we can be of any assistance. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.